Viernes de podcast, bienvenidos a Episodio, el podcast, el lugar donde hablamos de cine, series y demás entretenimiento desde la perspectiva de los efectos especiales de maquillaje. Acuérdense de nuestras redes que son @torefxstudio, @torefxstu, DIO. Yo soy Toncho Ábalos y aquí mero, arrancamos. Bien, y ya lo vieron en nuestras múltiples redes sociales, ya se lo habíamos anunciado, así que están completamente al tanto de lo que va a suceder hoy. Tenemos una entrevista muy especial con el señorón Kirk Thatcher. Él es un amigo personal, ese sí. Lo conocimos en 2017 en La Conque, en Querétaro, aunque ya éramos amigos por medio de la bonita red social. Ya habíamos platicado un poco y la verdad es que nos sorprendió muchísimo lo sencillo y lo generoso que es con su tiempo. Se acercó a nuestro stand a saludarnos, a ver lo que estábamos haciendo, se tomó fotitos con nosotros, incluso una foto que se tomó con Otto la puso de perfil. Creo que yo salía también ahí, no me acuerdo. Pero el caso es que muy buena onda este señor, nos firmó por ahí unos funcos. No solo eso, permítanme presumirles que el señor Kirk Thatcher es muy amigo de Chris Walas, el creador hasta cierto punto de los Gremlins. Él se encargó de diseñarlos desde la primera película y se llevó una cajita de un funko de rayita o de stripe a casa del señor Walas a que me lo firmara. Me mandó un videíto por ahí con Chris Walas firmándolo. Se tardó como un año en mandarlo por FedEx, pero fue muy buen detalle que haya hecho esto. Y ahora tengo una cajita de Funko firmada por Kirk Thatcher y por Chris Walas, y eso estuvo muy padre. Pero bueno, si usted se pregunta de quién estamos hablando, quién es Kirk Thatcher, déjenme decirles que el señor ha estado en 3 de las más grandes franquicias del universo universal. Él trabajó en Star Wars, ha trabajado muy seguido con los Muppets y ha trabajado también en Star Trek. Para darles un poquito de contexto, él entró a ILM a trabajar en Star Wars cuando era la venganza del Jedi y no el retorno del Jedi. Él estuvo ahí en el equipo de los que diseñaron al Rancor. Hizo otras cosas como titiritear a Nien Nunb y otros detallitos que hizo durante la producción. También ha dirigido muchas cosas con los Muppets, como Muppet Treasure Island. Si ustedes ubican la versión de los Muppets de Bohemian Rhapsody, pues el señor Kirk Thatcher la dirigió. Y también en Star Trek, que es uno de sus papeles más conocidos, además de haber sido productor. Él fue también el punk en el autobús que está molestando al Capitán Kirk y a Spock, que por cierto Spock lo duerme. Él compuso incluso la canción que trae en la grabadora. Y bueno, ha hecho infinidad de trabajo. Su última producción fue The Curious Creations of McConnell, que se estrenó en octubre en Netflix. Él fue escritor y director de la serie, creador también. Y bueno, pues también hablamos de eso. También ha trabajado dirigiendo episodios para series televisivas como The Kids Are Alright. Y bueno, pues es una máquina creativa este señor. Nosotros lo recordamos con mucho cariño por haber sido la persona que creó y que diseñó a los Dinosaurios, esta serie que vimos en los 90s, que tenía infinidad de trajes de criaturas y animatronics. Y bueno, pues de todo esto platicamos con el señor Kirk Thatcher, así que esperemos que disfruten esta pequeña plática de más o menos una hora que tuvimos con él. Aquí se las dejamos esperando que se la pasen tan bien como nosotros grabándola. Y nuevamente, si usted no gusta de escucharme hablar inglés, o más bien no lo maneja tanto lo que es el poliglotismo, vamos a contar con subtítulos en la versión de este podcast en YouTube para que no haya ningún problema. Okay. Well, thanks, Kirk. Thank you. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, and I'm glad it's finally happening. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, it's with the language difference, it's hard to find the time. Well, when I went to Querétaro, where I met you a couple of years ago, I was so kind of blown away, amazed at how nice everybody was, and not that I thought they would be, I mean, I don't really have an opinion of any country until I go there. I mean, I know certain things about it, but not what the culture is like, or how the people treat you. And everyone was just amazingly nice and friendly, and just, I mean, I can't think of another country that I visited, and I've visited a lot in Europe, where everyone was just so friendly. Now, I'm sure part of it was because I was a guest at the convention, but it just seemed like even when we were out at restaurants and people didn't know, who we were or anything, everyone just seemed incredibly nice and really friendly, and it really, really made an impression on me. So I will go to conventions anytime in Mexico.
Those were all hired actors.
Ah, good job.
Yeah.
And pretty, too. A lot of them were very pretty. All right, well, enough of the tourist perspective. Let's talk about monsters.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you were a bit surprised about how much we love dinosaurs in Mexico.
Absolutely blown away. Maybe that's why I thought everyone was so nice. But yeah, I was shocked. I had no idea. I knew that our dinosaurs had done better in South America than in the U.S. But yeah, I mean, people were hugging me. I mean, from, little boys, like 15-year-olds, all the way up to, grandmothers, abuelas, hugging me and saying thank you. And I was like, wow. I felt like the only time in my life I ever felt like a celebrity.
Well, you are the punk on the bus, and no one can take that from you.
Actually, it was funny. Normally, it's Star Trek that, most people know about, but dinosaurs, it is funny, though, now, these days, because I was just at a couple conventions this year already, and dinosaurs was the biggest draw. People were like, oh, you worked on dinosaurs? You designed dinosaurs? And it was more like Mexico. Like, that's what they wanted to hear about. That's what they wanted. So I don't have any pictures. So I started drawing the baby, but like a nice 20-minute, half-hour pencil sketch, and selling them. And I sold like 20 of them. Well, I don't normally do art. I'm not known. I don't think of myself as an artist, at least not at conventions. But it's something I started doing, is drawing the baby just, in black and white and pencil, and selling them. And I made, for me, I don't usually make money at conventions or much money. I sell a few autographs, but it was really fun. And it's so nice that I think what it is everyone who was a kid 28 years later, they're all adults now. And some of them have their own kids that they've been showing it to. And so they all have, jobs and money. So they're like, oh my God, that was my childhood. And it was really fun because, there were shows that, for me, that defined my childhood. So I know that feeling, and when we were making it, you don't think, oh, in 25 years, there'll be a generation of adults who, love this show. You just think, oh, we're trying to make a funny show and have it be successful. But it's this nice sort of, if you will, like an echo of love. Sounds like an album, but of this, because when they're 5 to 7 to 10-year-olds, they don't talk to you, they don't write you letters, you don't hear from them. But now they're all adults. It's great. It's really nice. But in Mexico, it was huge, so much bigger than the fan base here. So I think we should just get a Mexican company to bring it back. We'll just do it in Spanish first.
I have no problem with that. And actually, the voice acting behind the dinosaurs was superb. And mostly one of the most recognized actors, who is a legacy, Francisco Colmenero. Yeah. He voiced Earl Sinclair, and that's like etched into our hearts and memories. Really? And I mean that was, I would say, it was great work, great writing and directing, and the creatures were phenomenal. And the animatronics, the suits, everything was not something you would expect out of a TV production, even less so at the time. Yeah. But the voice acting, which is they dub it in Mexico, and that's what all of Latin America heard.
They heard the Mexican translation. They didn't, like every country didn't. Well, Brazil might have done their own translation, but any Spanish-speaking country used the Mexican translation.
Exactly.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, someone showed me a clip in Spanish, and I was surprised. Like, they really got the tone right. You know, they didn't change it that much, and Nene Consentido was perfect. I mean, it just sounded like the baby, but in Spanish, not like a completely different voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's what's fun. The voice actors and the translators can actually make the show funnier. That if you just did a straight translation, you know, it would work, but probably they can even make it funnier. And so not only the voice actors, but the people who do the translation, I'm sure I hope, you know, they would have a sense of humor to know how to make a joke work, you know, in that language as opposed to just a direct translation.
Yep. Well, you wrote the best one, the Food Goes Bad episode.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the way that came about was they were writing all these, what would you call it, like moral lessons or kind of political issues, not heavy ones all the time, but it was about something that we do today that, you know, we don't, that maybe should be changed. Like, you know, like throwing your grandmother off a cliff. You know, like and the point was don't throw away the elderly. You know, they have wisdom and they're useful. They're not just a drag on society or a burden. And so I said, this is great, but let's just do something about the absurdity of the premise. You know, what the idea that they eat live food and the food is in the refrigerator. Like, to me, I just like the silliness of that. And like, well, what if the food in the refrigerator revolts and has a mutiny and takes over the house? And they just kind of looked at me and they said, okay, that's fun. That's different. You know, so I went off and wrote it. And then Tim Doyle, who was another writer on the show, he and I put it together and co-wrote it. And he actually did the voice of General Chow. Now, what did they call General Chow in Spanish?
You know, that's a good question. I do remember that he had his best friend, like the
cabbage.
Yeah, and they just called it repollo, which is cabbage.
Yeah, in English, it was cabby, which is like a nickname for cab. It's just, you know, like saying, you know, perrito. It's like cabby, just a diminutive, if you will, or a nickname for cabbage. That was silly, but he was General Chow, which chow in English is a nickname for food.
Right.
Like you say chow time, and also it sounds like, you know, it sounds like a Chinese last name, and it also means goodbye. So there's a lot of funny synchronicities with that name. So that's why we named him General Chow. But yeah, I never thought about that. Was the name a joke in Spanish, you know? That was really fun to write, and it was very Muppety.
Yeah.
And that way, it was like silly and had a lot of puppets in it to be the food. And, well, you can see my influence because then after Dinosaurs, I wrote Muppet Treasure Island, which was, you know, about a bunch of Muppet puppets mutinying on a ship. It's I guess, a theme in my work. Un tema en mi trabajo. Was that right?
Yeah. Perfect. So who came up with the 1 million helicopters and $1 joke? I mean, it's super silly, but it cracks me up every time.
That was probably me. I mean, I tend to bring the complete absurd to these things, the extreme silliness. It's kind of what I love, and why they put me with Tim Doyle, who actually, you know, could concoct a story. Like Monty Python is my jam, as the kids today say. Like the silliness that Monty Python did with what they would do is take a premise, you know, an idea that's absurd, but then apply logic to it. So that's what I like to do, like with Food Goes Bad. Take the premise of they have live food in their refrigerator, almost like it's a little zoo. And what if the animals are like prisoners and they revolt and you know, and stage a coup? And but then apply the logic of if you're stuck in a refrigerator, do you go a little bit insane? And, you know, knowing like it's being in a prisoner, and you know you're going to be eaten, you get desperate, but B, you go a little crazy, which is why his best friend is a cabbage.
Right.
And then you just kind of take that and then you write it as if it's a real story, you know. So that was the fun entirely of Dinosaurs. I mean, when Jim Henson and I started the idea, well, Jim said, I want to do a show, a sitcom with dinosaurs to illustrate the dinosaur thinking, or, you know, kind of old, ignorant thinking. You know, it's kind of as a metaphor for today. And funnily enough, with our current president, it's probably more appropriate or more timely than even it was in the 90s. As someone has pointed out, BP Richfield, Earl's boss, it almost directly says things that Donald Trump says now. Have you seen that video?
Yeah, yeah, I've seen it.
It's funny, but it's terrifying. Like, oh my God, like we were trying to write the worst, most egomaniacal, short-sighted kind of despot boss, and now our president essentially imitates a lot of that behavior, and even dialogue says similar things. But that was Jim's intent, was to kind of have fun with, and that's what's great about puppets and creatures. You can do metaphors about things that are true in society, but nobody gets offended. You know, if it's about a bunch of carnivore dinosaurs who don't like the herbivore dinosaurs, you know, it can be a metaphor for, you know, the conflict in the Middle East, or, you know, vegetarians, or people who don't like liberals, or you can apply any
racism and xenophobia.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
And the coolest thing about it is that they didn't underestimate the fact that they could understand in some level, and
right.
it was brilliant.
Well, we never thought of it as a kid show, kind of like the Muppets. The Muppet Show was never thought of as a kid show. It was just, it's funny, Tancho, because in America, and maybe other countries, I don't know, but particularly in America, if it's very creative with creatures or it's kind of whimsical, suddenly it's considered a kid show. You know, por los niños. It's not denigrated, but downgraded a bit. It's not, you know, smart. And if you do something like Dinosaurs, which was never conceived as a kid show, it was just a comedy, and in a lot of ways very political and very adult in the ideas we were making fun of or pointing up. People still, because it was creatures, not actors, it's a kid show. And as an artist, and I'm sure you feel the same or have the same kind of feelings, it's like, it's frustrating. Now, if, you know, Gremlins is a good example. It's not a kids movie, but people still kind of think of it as a scary kids movie. And it's really...
Yeah, and I'm the worst parent ever for having shown that to my kid. He loved it, by the way.
Of course. Because kids, like you said, kids are not stupid. Kids will get it. And I said it's not a kids movie. It's a horror comedy, or a dark comedy, as we say. So that's like where, again, between the silliness of Monty Python and the dark comedy, Comedia Oscura of Gremlins, that's my love. Hellboy had that. We were talking before you started recording about Hellboy, and particularly Guillermo del Toro's Hellboys had that darkness, but that humor, you know, especially Hellboy 2. Taking that world, like that idea of particularly with Abe Sapien and his love, you know, his crush. And he and Hellboy talking about chicks, you know, chicks, man, they make you crazy, and getting drunk. I love that. So it's funny, there's certain things with Muppet-style puppets. Now, creatures like Gremlins or Dinosaurs, I think and, you know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you're given more leeway to be, I hate to use the word serious, but do a more serious story. It's not immediately thought of like a little kid's thing in some ways. But still, if it's not horror or sci-fi that's dead serious, like Aliens or all the kind of classic monster stuff, it tends to get thrown in the children's entertainment box.
Absolutely right. I guess you have to also understand I mean, as a creator, you intended to resonate with certain audience, and obviously you want to get to as many people as possible, but you have something in mind when you're writing and when you're visualizing the idea. But in the end, the suits, they want to make as much money as possible. So if they can market it as kids entertainment, they damn well will. And,
but in some ways they shoot themselves in the foot, because if you're saying it's a kids movie, then you're cutting out. If you said that Crocodile, and that's an old reference. I'm trying to think of a more contemporary reference of a good comedy, but you market it as a chick flick, a movie for women. And they make those, they make them still quite often, but I'm trying to think of something that was larger than that. And
it kind of happened to Guillermo del Toro with Crimson Peak. It was marketed as a horror movie when it was actually a Victorian romance that just so happened to have ghosts.
Yeah, it was pretty much a horror movie, though. I mean, to me, it felt like a 70s Hammer film. I mean, that's obviously what he was drawing from. But you're right, there was very little horror in it. It was mainly this very long, drawn-out, Victorian romance. That's why it reminded me so much of those 70s Hammer films, where just as a kid, you're like, oh, and get to the monsters, get to the ghosts. All this dialogue and talking about this romance bored me as a kid, and I was like even getting those feelings as an adult. But the creepy factor was amazing. I mean, it was kind of an interesting ride. But I mean, that's the thing as artists too. Not everything is gonna be a giant hit. Speaking of giant hits, how is Hellboy, the new Hellboy, is it opened in Mexico?
Yeah, it did last month.
How did it do?
I think the general thought is that it was rebooted too soon. And it's a shame because the creatures are beautiful. David Harbour is great in it, and that's sad.
Yeah, it's interesting. I what you just said, I loved the creature design. I love the darkness of it. It was much more, in some ways, like the graphic novels that Mike Mignola does. It was darker, and Ron Perlman. I mean, I love David Harbour. I agree with you. I thought he did a great job. I think that the movie in total lacked some of the heart that Guillermo's versions have, and I missed that, and I think it didn't click with the audience. But I think you're right too. It's sort of like when James Bond went from Sean Connery to what's his name,
Roger Moore.
I think people, it dropped off because people are like, well, that's not James Bond anymore. It's a guy pretending to be James Bond. But the tones got goofier. If you remember, I grew up with those, so the Roger Moores were funnier, like sillier, more cheeky, as the British would say.
My favorite is the man with the golden gun.
Oh, yeah?
And that's, yeah.
I think my favorite, because it hit me right at the right age, was Live and Let Die. With that crazy voodoo, all the stuff in New Orleans, and Jeffrey, what was his name? Jeffrey Holder? As the voodoo, the voodoo king. And the Paul McCartney song. I just love that. But, Man with the Golden Guns, that's got Christopher Lee, right? Scaramanga.
Exactly. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that one was... And it's got Hervé Villachez as the... I forgot what his character's name was, but... that's interesting because it's one of the few other film franchises where they changed the character and it kept going. It was still successful. They made... 3 or 4 Sean Connerys, and then 3 or 4 Roger Moores, and then Pierce Brosnan and Timothy Dalton and Daniel Craig. They just keep changing Bonds, but people love the franchise, and I think they probably thought, well, let's do that with Hellboy. But I thought David Harbour was a good choice. I actually didn't like the guy who played his father, Dr. Broom. I like him as an actor. I just thought he was a little too angry. He was too mean. He was like, really? He was that big of a jerk? Because the fellow who did it in the first one, what's his name? He talks like this. John Hurt. Hellboy. And the new Ian McShane is just so mean. So I think changing the characters didn't help either. In other words, Hellboy was about the same, but having suddenly his father, Dr. Broom, suddenly be kind of an angry jerk as opposed to more of a fatherly, like, Hellboy, be careful. Now he's like, shut up, you jerk, and go kill you, do your job, grow a pair of balls. He's like yelling at him, and I was like, oh, it kind of took some of the, like I said, the heart out of it, which I missed, because I kind of loved that there was this guy who loved Hellboy like a son, saw through, which is still the story in the new movie. He saw through what he was supposed to be, which is the demon destroyer of Earth, and saw the humanity in there, or the goodness in him, which is a great story.
Yeah, but it's not the same to just say it at the end than
right.
to actually
exactly.
portray it in every piece of dialogue and the demeanor and the chemistry between them. You can tell that Professor Vroom, John Hurt, cares about Hellboy without him saying it.
Right, and exactly right. It's a cop out at the end to go, I've always loved you, Hellboy, and I believed in you. And you're like, well, you treated him like crap. And that's a common story. A parent, a father particularly, who's really mean, but you find out in the end they did it because they loved you. But I agree, they didn't show it at all. There was no, don't tell me, show me, as they say is the best rule for movies. And exactly. they never showed it. And I think even casting Ian McShane that guy is not a warm, fuzzy guy. And he could probably have played it sweeter.
They were probably trying to steer away as much as possible from the original two movies, and Mignola it up.
Yeah, well, maybe.
That up with them.
Anyway, I agree with you though. I love the look of it. I love the creatures. I thought the creature design, and I love that there were so many. Yeah, I wish it had been more successful because I wonder if that means there'll be no more Hellboy movies.
Exactly. I mean, having 5 Hellboy movies, out of which 3 or 4 are good, is better than not having any. So,
right.
More power to them. All right, so let's talk about Gremlins. How did that come to be? What? Pretend I don't know anything.
Yeah. I don't have to pretend. Oh, so mean. Well, when I was hired to work at ILM, Chris Walas was going to run the Creature Shop with Phil Tippett. The two of them were going to kind of co-run the Revenge of the Jedi Creature Shop. So when I went to interview, I met Phil, but I went to lunch with Chris Walas and Ken Ralston, and I really hit it off with them. I got the job. I think they called me a week later and said, okay, we're going to hire you. And like 3 weeks later, I moved up. But in that time, Chris had left to start his own company. At that point, I think just called CWI, Chris Walas Incorporated. So I started working on Jedi, but I stayed friends with Chris because we just had similar sensibilities. And it turned out he really liked fishing. And I love fishing. So when I wasn't working, which for probably the first year on Jedi, I was pretty busy. But after the movie had been shot and it was post-production, we were doing like the Rancor and things that there wasn't this crazy deadlines to get it done. I started hanging out with Chris and we would go fishing. And that's where we really became like really good friends. And just talk about monsters and movies and just be silly and stupid together and have a laugh. So Jedi finished up and I was working on like Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 3, just kind of doing odd jobs, creature stuff at ILM. And I would go and hang out with Chris on the weekends, and he was getting some smaller movies, and I sculpted a skinned human. It was a horror film. He needed a skinned human head, like a woman's. The idea was that all the skin had been torn off her head, and so I made that for him, and just would help out on the weekends for no money, just, like friends making monsters. And pretty much at the end of that ILM run, where there wasn't really much creature stuff going on, he got Gremlins. He said, hey, I got this big movie I'm putting together a shop. Do you want to work with me? I said, I would love to. And not much is happening at ILM at this point. So this is right, I think around 82, 83. I'd have to look back. But so I went to work with Chris and set up his mold and paint shop. It was amazing. It was a crew of almost all newbies. I would think there was about 4 of us who had worked on Jedi. Tony McVeigh, who sculpted. Chris designed and did the little design maquette, but Tony sculpted the gremlin that was used as the master. And then I molded it, and then I designed the paint job, and I designed their eyes based on Chris's small. Chris made like a little 6-inch tall maquette, but it was pretty loose. and the paint job was just kind of rough. So I turned that into I remember I did 4 different paint jobs to show to Spielberg and Joe Dante. And one was kind of 2 variations on what Chris had done, kind of the muddy browns with a yellow or kind of beige colored stripe, more of a, I would quote unquote, realistic. And then I did one that was very green, more like an iguana or a tropical lizard, you know, brighter greens and some more color, greens and yellows. And then I did a crazy one that was like a coral snake or a king snake that mimics a coral snake. It was like brick red and yellow and black and very, very kind of loud and looked like in nature you would be like, oh, that's a poisonous animal because it has all. And that was the idea that they were warning you that they're poisonous, like coral snakes and the frogs in the Amazon that are brightly colored because they're poisonous. So they went with, and I think they made the right decision. It was just we're trying to give them options. They went with the color scheme that you see, which is kind of a muddy green-brown with a kind of beige tummy and the stripes, and the eyes were red and yellow. And so that's how it started. And then, so I worked on Gremlins for about the first 4 to 6 months, setting up the shop and, you know, building Gremlins. And then Chris wanted me to stay on and run the mold shop while the production moved to LA to shoot it. And I'm like, I didn't want to sit in a mold room and run urethane and stuff. And I'd gotten urethane poisoning a couple of years earlier on Jedi. I just gotten very sick.
Wow.
So I didn't want to spend all my time in a room with these nasty chemicals. So I said, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to go back and learn about computers, because I'd seen what they'd done on Star Trek 3 with the Genesis effect. And I would hang out when I was at ILM with the computer and the Pixar guys, and realizing that computers were going to ultimately take over special effects. So I said, I'm going to go back and learn about computer animation and kind of get out of the rubber room world.
Boy, were you wrong.
I know, I'm an idiot. I wished I'd learned more. So I quit the creature business essentially and moved back to LA. And but what was fun was when they were filming, I got to go on Puppeteer. There was a lot of big Gremlin group scenes, particularly the movie theater and the bar, where there was just, you know, a ton of Gremlins. And so I puppeteered for about 2 weeks on it, along with all my friends who'd been there, but I wasn't working with the chemicals anymore. So I had a blast. I got to know Phoebe Cates as I spent a couple days basically hiding right in front of her at the bar when we were shooting the bar scene. And so, yeah, that was Gremlins. And then while we were filming, I would do voices. You know, you're puppeteering and you're going like that, just to give something the actors to work with. And I think they might have used some of that as just, again, in the big group scenes when everyone's just kind of making noise.
Yeah, you're actually credited as a voice actor for Gremlins.
In Gremlins 2. I don't think I get credit in Gremlins 1, but in Gremlins 2, I definitely did a lot of voices. So Gremlins 2 came about. Rick Baker was a friend, and I didn't make any Gremlins on Gremlins 2, but Rick said, hey, we're doing these big group scenes. Do you want to come and puppeteer? Because I want people who, you know, worked on the original, who know like how to do a two-handed gremlin, you know, one gremlin on each hand. So I went and shot for, again, like a week, 4 or 5 days for that big group scene at the end, right before they all get killed. And it was standing again, like next to Don.
Spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers. Sorry, kids. And so that was essentially and then on Gremlins 2, once it was wrapped and they were in post-production, I went in and it was with Mark Dodson, who did, so basically it was just, they added me to the group of 3 guys who'd done the original, which was Frank Welker, who did Stripe, and Howie Mandel, who did Gizmo, and Mark Dodson, who did just every Gremlin, you know, all the not specific Gremlin stuff. So they added me in because they knew I could do voices, because I'd done them on the first one while we were filming. So yeah, I went and did almost 3 weeks of Gremlin voices, and the ones I did that probably are the most memorable were the electricity Gremlin, and that was me doing 2 voices that they combined in post. One was, which was kind of what I call the electrical element, and then the voice was. So they made that into the electricity Gremlin. And I remember I had to do the take in the movie is probably a good 45 seconds long of him coming out of the phone and, you know, going around the room and all the close-ups. Right. And I did it in one take, and I almost burst a blood vessel because doing for 45 seconds is not easy, but I did it. And and then I just did a bunch of what we called gremlin gibberish, you know, like, and we did a high gremlin, which was more of the screechy, like, and then there was the low gremlin, which is like it sounds like Russians. And but what was funny was we had to do them in like 5 languages. We dubbed them because they didn't want to have them dubbed with the dialogue. They just wanted to send the gremlins out because they wanted to make sure the gremlins sounded like gremlins. Or whoever did the human actors, they would obviously default to whoever spoke the language. And but the gremlin stuff we did, so we had to do gremlins, and I know we did it in French, Spanish, German, well, English obviously. We didn't do it in Japanese. It was maybe Italian. It was 4 or 5 languages, which was pretty funny. So we do one language a day. So that was like another week. I think the first week was just doing it all in English, essentially. And then the next 2 or 3 days was doing it in the other languages. So that was fun. And I learned how to say things in German, like going up and going down in Gizmo Kaka.
Awesome.
So, yeah, so the Gremlins was a good, over the first movie and the second movie. I probably worked on Gremlins movies off and on for, what was that, like, I think we did Gremlins 2 in 88 or 89. Probably it was either 87 or 89 because I was in New York in 1988 working with Jim Henson on the Jim Henson Hour. Yeah, so that was a blast, and I love the Gremlins. And Chris Wallace and I came up with a great idea for a prequel to show the Gremlins coming over from China in the 1800s, but nobody wants to hear from us. I think Chris Columbus has a script, so they've been talking about a Gremlins movie, whether it's a prequel or sequel, for years, but I've heard rumblings over at Warner Brothers that they are that Chris Columbus has written a script. And
there's actually, and we've talked about that in the podcast, and we're very excited because it's, there was what was it, Hollywood Reporter or Deadline? I don't know where the note came from.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are talks about having Gremlins 3 and doing it all practical, and if anything, they're going to use the digital effects to make the puppeteers' job easier.
Right.
And
right. I think that's the best. That's a question I get asked. Do I like practical? I think, computer effects are bad. I'm like, I think the combination is the best because you get the best of both worlds. Making something look like it's really in the room is a lot of work. Whereas if you can put something in the room but make its eyes or its mouth lip sync better in post, then do both, because it always is going to look more real if it's real. But Where the Wild Things Are was done that way. They had giant suits that walked around and were actually in the environment. And then the faces were animated in post-production. So it was, because you're never going to get rubber to move that quickly and that exactly without spending a fortune. Because you're basically building giant robots that can do lip sync, and that's expensive. I mean, they can do it if you have one in your movie. Usually they'll do it. But if you had, Where Wild Things Are, what had 7 of them.
Beautiful movie, by the way.
Yeah, stunning. But because they did it right, they had giant walk-around suits with real fur, and everything was there. And the face had, eyes, but they didn't animate the face. The face was all animated in post, so it was kind of that perfect blend. So yeah, with Gremlins, it'd probably be best to do rubber Gremlins, and then hide the puppeteers with computers, and then if they're running and stuff, do it that way for the things that you can't really do well with a puppet. But combine them. And that's the thing now. I mean, with CG, you can scan the actual, you can model it in digitally and then print them out. But then your model will actually match what you've sculpted because it was sculpted in digital form. And then you can animate them in a very realistic fashion with the computer. But then for all the stuff where they're in the room, haranguing and bothering and attacking people, you can actually have real, Gremlins. I think everyone asks me, what do I think about practical effects? I think, well, they're sometimes the most practical solution. But I think the hybrid is always the best because you get the best of both worlds.
Those are my thoughts exactly. I'm not against digital, and I have friends who do beautiful work digitally, but yeah, the combination is the way to go, definitely. So the Gremlins dubbing, was that for Gremlins 2 or both of them? When you the multi-language dubbing?
That was just for Gremlins 2. They might have done it for Gremlins 1, but again, I didn't do voices on Gremlins 1 except when we were filming. So Gremlins,
you only did it on set.
On right? Set, yeah, which is how they knew I could do it and why they hired me on Gremlins 2.
Beautiful stuff.
a very weird career, but it's never boring.
Exactly. And no two jobs are the same.
Right. And another thing, I don't even know if I get credit on it, but I worked on Robocop 2. I think I get credit on the Ed 209, or not the Kane team. Did you see Robocop 2?
Of course I did.
Okay, well, you know the big tube where they have Kane's brain and eyeballs and spine floating in the lab before they put it in the robot that becomes Kane? Do you remember that scene? It's like very 50s sci-fi. It's like a glass tube with bubbles in it, and you see the brain and the eyeballs floating in it. I made that. I designed and built that.
Wow. And
I designed and made at the end when he pulls like the brain bucket, we called it, out and smashes it on the ground. I designed and built that. So that was two things I did that are not well known. Also, somebody was posting about house in the movie. I was wondering if it was called casa in Spanish.
Sometimes they come up with such crazy titles, translations. Like the movie can be called House, and and in Spanish it's the Crazy Adventures of
or yes, Knocking on Death's Door, and you're like, it's completely different. Yeah. But anyway, I designed a creature or a bunch of the creatures for House, but the most memorable one that they didn't really change at all was Big Ben, who was the zombie military guy. It was a Vietnam vet zombie. So there's a bunch of stuff I did that doesn't usually get mentioned, so I'm mentioning it.
I appreciate that, so we can follow more of your work and realize that that's sometimes the way it goes. You don't get credit, but you still did it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And you don't do it for the credit. You do it because it's fun and you're working with your friends, and you get paid. That's the good part. And do you do more makeup or creatures, or both? You're kind of a one-stop shop. You do a little bit of everything.
We try to be a one-stop shop. We're actually working on an animatronic project that's been taking forever, but it's finally taking shape. But yeah, I mean, we try. We obviously love creatures, but but yeah, the makeup is a very important part of it. And you knew my my right hand of doom, Marusen. She's great with beauty makeup or editorial makeup and also makeup effects.
I mean, I know America's kind of dominated the film business for a long time, and now China is kicking in. I'm just curious. They were for a while filming a lot of U.S.-based movies, but down at Churubusco in Mexico. Yeah. And then I don't know if the tax break or the budgets went. Suddenly they weren't, but. Because there's a great tradition of Mexican horror movies from, I remember growing up, just seeing about them in Famous Monsters, mummy movies and vampires and the wrestling movies. What was the rest? Santos? Was it
El
Santos?
Santo,
yeah.
Santos is a character created by a cartoonist from Guadalajara, which is kind of a parody of El Santo. Called Santos. So it's funny. It's funny that you
I've seen that.
Brought it up.
Yeah. Well, no, I've seen both. I just couldn't remember what the name was. And I like that in Hellboy. Actually, speaking of Hellboy again, the new one, there was a little bit of that with the guy who'd become a luchador. And
I love that.
A luchador. Yeah, and it was great. And then when I thought it was fantastic. So it just made me think. Nobody's been that I've seen. Again, maybe they just make them and they only show them in Mexico or in South America, but. I love the sense of fun of those pictures,
I think it's going to come back because Netflix just opened shop in Mexico. And,
really?
Yeah, they're opening an office in Mexico City, and I think that's going to bring a lot of projects and a lot of things that are going to happen here in Mexico.
Nice. Well, I hope you get a lot of that work.
Me too. So, the curious creations of Kristen McConnell. What a joy.
Thank you. Now, how did that translate? Was the translation good?
You know what? The in Netflix, usually what they've been doing is, you're looking at House of Cards, and it's House of Cards. The show titles are not translated,
right?
And I did see the Curious Creations of Kristen McConnell dubbed in Spanish because I was watching it with my kid,
sure,
and he loved it. He loves Edgar.
Oh, good. Well,
and the dubbing was good.
Good, because one of the things about Netflix, which is interesting, is when we did that show, we finished in October or November, actually basically December 1st, we finished filming in 2017. They didn't release it until 10 months later. And, we were done with post-production, editing and all that like March. So you had April, May, June, July, August, September, October. You had 7 months. And we were like, and, we knew that they wanted to release it around Halloween, which we thought was good. But part of it is because they take 4 months to translate it they dub it into 32 languages, 32, and then they translate it into like a subtitle in 100 and something. So they spend a lot of time making sure that as many people can watch it and understand it, which is great because we had fans in Thailand and Romania. I mean, places you never thought it would show. But it was a great show. Now, here's the thing to your viewers or your listeners. I actually directed all of them and wrote half of them and was the showrunner. So it was a great job for me because I finally got to do what I always wanted to do, is kind of create a show. And I did it with Christine, obviously. She was the star and had, 50% or more of the ideas are hers and how to make it. But together we made the show. And I had a blast. I'm really upset that they're not bringing it back for another season. But Edgar, you brought up Edgar. So in the three creatures in that, Edgar the werewolf, Rankle the mummified cat, and Rose the raccoon, we tried to create these very distinct, separate personalities of people that we kind of know. You've got the very queeny, bitchy uncle, which is Rankle. You've got I said Rose is basically a drunk 5-year-old with ADHD.
And I love Rose.
And Edgar was funny because he was the hardest one to come up with, because Christine sort of wanted, at some point she said, I wanted to be like, she's like his nephew, like not literally, but like she treats him like he's kind of innocent, but he looks like a big scary monster. And I finally said, what if he's just like a black Labrador, like those really sweet big dogs that are all black, and like if you don't know it, you might be terrified, but then you realize it's just a big baby and they want to lay in your lap and and cuddle you. And so he came about as sort of the dichotomy of the biggest, scariest thing you can imagine, with teeth and black hair, and he just is kind of slow and sweet. It was fun to write those three different characters and have those different attitudes about everything. It's like the Muppets. When you write for the Muppets, you've got about 5 minimum main characters with very different attitudes. So it's fun as a writer because you got to explore these different aspects of human personalities with these characters. So and Christine loved it. She was very much on board with what we were doing and very involved with it too. I mean, we didn't do anything without working with her, running it by her. Yeah, it was fun. Originally, the show where her evil cousin shows up and tries to kill everybody. At one point, that was going to be her evil twin. We were going to have her play both roles, but it turned out it would take another almost 2 days to shoot, because we'd have to shoot everything twice, or all the scenes together twice. And we were going to change Christine's makeup and make her look, like her identical cousin.
Right, but meaner.
But meaner, and we were going to change her hair and everything, but we didn't have the time. So what's interesting, a lot of people don't know, is the woman who plays her cousin, Evie, is actually the woman who puppeteers Rose. She does 2 jobs on the show. She plays the crazy cousin, and she's also mainly the puppeteer and the voice of Rose, the raccoon.
Yeah, and she is phenomenal.
She's
so
great.
Talented.
Well, it was funny because she's an actress and a puppeteer. Not a lot of people do both. And when we wrote that episode, and Netflix said, well, you don't have or our producers like, you don't have the money to cast. We literally don't have the money to cast another. And we did the show for very little money. We don't have the money to pay an actress to play Evelyn, Evie. And I said, well, let's use Colleen. She's amazing, a great actress. She's super funny, but can play crazy. I mean, she's just really good. And which is why we basically wrote Rose for her. When we were creating the show, I said, well, there's only one performer I know who can pull this off and make it funny and scary, and that's Colleen Smith. And then, so when it came to casting Evie, I said, well, we're already paying Colleen to be there, so let's use her. And what's funny is Netflix, who are like, you don't have the money for it, was like, well, we don't really know her. I'm like, well, you can't say you don't have the money to hire somebody and then say the one person we actually are already paying you can't use. So we showed them her reel, because she's worked on other shows and stuff, and they finally went, oh, okay. And then they loved her. I mean, after they saw what we shot, they're like, oh my God, she's perfect. So that was a great part of it too, is casting people I know and love and would always wanted to work with, because I never worked with Colleen or Michael, who did Rankle. I'd never worked with them as puppeteers before. I knew them, I was friends with them because they had done puppeteering, but never on anything I'd worked on. And then Drew Massey, who did Edgar, I've worked with and known for years. And what's funny is, talk about range. Drew played Sid the Science Kid, which is a kid's show. And he talks like this. He's like, hey, guys. So that's what he's in Sid. And then on Edgar, he's like, all right, well, I guess. And it was funny because, again, an actor with an amazing amount of range. But normally he has his normal speaking voice is kind of a higher register. So it's fun for him to be this big, kind of slow, all right, I guess, kind of dumb, dog, as opposed to like a hyperactive little kid with lots of ideas. So I think they had fun with it too, because again, here's the thing. We all get typecast, right? We all get typecast as what your job is, as an actor, what your range is, especially with your looks. If Drew looks like he's 12 years old, I think he's 50 now, but he still looks like he's 28. He's just got a very youthful face. So as an actor, he's not going to get a role like a big meanie or a big, scary creature. But as a puppeteer, you can kind of do anything. So it's fun to stretch your friends as actors to let them do roles they wouldn't normally get as puppeteers, because you can kind of, it's almost like performing voice, but able to embody any creature that you're put in. So that was fun to kind of stretch people that I've worked with or wanted to work with, and let them do something fun for them. And then as at least the English language version, people loved it. I mean, we had so much love for that show. I think Christine doubled her Instagram base just on the one season. I think the reason it's not coming back is it's still a niche market, a cooking show or even a dark comedy cooking show. And everybody who saw it, I always say everyone who saw it loved it, but I don't think, according to Netflix, enough people saw it to make them want to do another season. Their one question was, can you do it for less money? And we're like, no, we couldn't even do it for the money you paid us. We need, we all did it as a labor of love, but you're not getting a second season for that cost. And so I think that was it too. They just didn't want to spend the money, because at the end of the day, they just look at it as a cooking show, or a baking show. And all their other baking shows are basically shot live. There's not scripted. There's no puppets. All that is expensive. And most of the time it's like, 4 people baking in a kitchen, and they just shoot it for a couple days or a day. And then that's the episode, where we were like 3 days to shoot one episode. It was more like a traditional, sitcom or series.
Well, that's very sad, because it was, maybe if you rank it against other types of entertainment, you would see that it's actually very liked and loved and valuable. But yeah, I mean, if they're comparing you guys to Nailed It or shows like that, it's so much more expensive because it's so much more. But,
right. And that I think was the problem. So I know that they're trying to get it back. In other words, to sell it somewhere else. And look, it's great that they gave us a chance and let us make that first season, and hopefully someone else will pick it up, some version of it. I mean, again, I'm sure Christine will do other things because people love watching her and seeing what she makes. And, hopefully I could be involved, but, we're not we're not tied together at the hip, but she was wonderful to work with, and I'd do anything with her. So I mean, the thing is, on Netflix they'll just let it run forever, so it'll always be around.
Exactly, and I'm sure if someone will be smart enough to pick it up.
We'll do it in Mexico.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, man. Well, I've got to get going. I'm supposed to.
Thank you so much for being here, and let's do this again sometime. I mean, absolutely. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too.
Absolutely, yeah. And I want to come visit. I want to come down to Guadalajara.
Bien, aquí terminamos el episodio número 33 de Toro FX Studio, el podcast correspondiente al viernes 17 de mayo de 2019. Esperamos que esta entrevista haya sido de su agrado y acuérdense que para seguir la conversación hay que seguirnos en todas nuestras redes, que son @ToroFXstudio, @ToroFXSTUDIO. Yo soy Toncho Ábalos, mis redes son @TonchoÁbalos con T.
Hey, I'm Kirk Thatcher. My social media is @KirkThatcher on Instagram and Kirk R. Thatcher on Facebook. Y hasta el próximo llamado.